in July I got my hands on a bunch of games and even played a few games too, so let's talk about those things. Pretty much the only reason I got a few games this month was due to some traveling I did. Well, sort of local getaways more than traveling, I suppose, but one of our little getaways was a family getaway, and of course when I'm traveling places I always have to check out the local game store, so we did go and have a look around one of the local game stores there, and my 7-year-old son saw a game on this shelf and said, "Daddy, can we buy that one?" And that game was Century Golem Edition. Now, I've never actually played any of the games in the Century series. I think there are like 3 games that all connect to each other in the original Century series. Then they've given them a complete visual overhaul for these Golem editions. They've released this one for the original game, and they've announced the second one for the second game in the series. So like I said, I've never played any of these. However, I had heard that at least the first game in this series is sort of like a Splendor 2.0. Now, I did enjoy Splendor quite a lot for a while, but it's a game that was quite simple, and after a lot of plays, I did sort of grow tired of it and moved on from it. So when I heard that this was sort of like a slightly maybe more complex, little bit more involved version, but hardly, I guess, just a very small step in complexity above Splendor, I thought, you know what, maybe it's a game that we would enjoy playing with the kids. So just kind of on an impulse based on my son's request, I decided to pick it up. And we did manage to play it several times with different groups of people, so I'm going to come back and talk about this when I talk about the games played, and I'll tell you what I thought about Century Golem Edition. My other little getaway was a solo getaway, and I released a video in July in which I was doing some metal detecting at the Scarborough Bluffs Beach in Toronto. And when I was staying in Toronto, in the east end of Toronto in Scarborough, there was a game shop that was actually just a few blocks away from where I was staying called Board Game Bliss. Now, they do most of their selling online through their boardgamebliss.com website. This isn't an advertisement, I'm not getting paid anything to mention them, but they do also have a physical shop location. Of course, they have rows of new games along the walls as well, but one full wall is dedicated to games that customers have brought into the shop that they want to sell. So they're used games that people are looking to unload. The customer, I guess, will set a price on the game and the store will put it up, I guess, what is that called, consignment, where the shop gets a cut and the customer gets a cut if the game sells. But what it means for me as a customer is I can walk in and I can see a whole wall full of used games at pretty decent prices. So of course I ended up picking up a few used games from that shelf, including one that was pretty much just based on the look of it called Enchantress. Now, I believe this was originally a Kickstarter game. It's a game that has some kind of fun minis, a lot of interesting terrain. The whole look of it was pretty interesting, I thought. For the cost of a used game, maybe it's worth picking it up and trying it out, see if my kids end up enjoying it. So I've given a look through the rule book. It looks pretty simplistic. Maybe it's one that kids will end up enjoying. I can't see it being an interesting game to play with adults and sort of more serious gamers, but it might be one that's fun with the kids. Time will tell. It's also a rare instance where the box is actually too small for all the components that are in it. It has these cardboard stand-up terrain pieces that are trees and rocks and so on, and if you don't want to have to take them all apart again after each game, it means they don't fit in the box. So I have a couple of bags of just sort of cardboard terrain pieces that are separate from the box here. But time will tell whether we enjoy Enchantress or not. Another one is a game that I've been actually keeping half an eye on for several years now because of my enjoyment of one versus all games with hidden movement. I've been curious about what the Three Musketeers is like. Now, it's not entirely a hidden movement game, rather it's a game where one of the musketeers is carrying an object and the player who is opposing the musketeers doesn't know which character is carrying it, and it can be passed from one musketeer to the next and so on. So there is that sort of hidden element in the game. Again, it's a fairly simple game. There's not a ton going on. I think it's one we could play as a family. I haven't yet gotten a chance to actually try it out, but I hope that we'll be able to sit down with the four of us at some point, give it a try, and see how well it works for us. Now, this last used game that I picked up from Board Game Bliss is totally a blast from the past for me. This goes back to my childhood. This version here is called SuperFooty Classic Edition, but when I was a kid, we had a game called Subbuteo, which is a game about flicking soccer players on the map so that you're flicking the player into the ball and thus advancing the ball down the field, trying to score that way. And we played this a lot throughout my childhood. So when I saw that there was a copy of this for sale, I thought, oh, I gotta get this and try it out with my kids. I did have a chance to try it with my 9-year-old, so again, this is one that I'll come back to when I talk about the games that were played this month. Oh, another thing I forgot to mention when I was talking about that shop we stopped into as a family during our family getaway was the fact that, of course, it had magic packs, because that's how these brick and mortar stores remain open in this era of online sales. But my 9-year-old son, such a sweet kid, he sort of whispered to my wife and said, "Can I buy Daddy some magic cards?" So he ended up using his allowance, and I picked up 2 packs of sealed magic boosters. And when I got back to the resort we were staying at and opened them up, I found what was, at the time, the most valuable card I've ever found in a sealed pack. It was one of those double-sided cards called Search for Azcanta, and at the time that I had found it, it was listed at $13.49 US on mtggoldfish.com, the site that I go to sort of to evaluate the cards that I've acquired. So my son was super excited about the fact that he had purchased me what was my most valuable magic card. Another item that's somewhat tangentially related to board games that I picked up at that shop and a couple others were these new Citadel contrast paints that all the minis painters are talking about. From what I understand, these are sort of a cross between a standard base paint and a wash, in that they are, I guess, a little runnier than a standard paint, not quite as runny as a wash, so that they will flow into the cracks and create sort of a sharp contrast in the shade of the color without having to do first the base layer, then the wash over the top of that, and maybe some dry brushed highlighting after that to get that same sort of light to darkness effect. It's kind of an all-in-one shot type of deal, which isn't going to necessarily give the same depth of highlight and detail, but it is going to give you a similar effect in a much easier and shorter time frame. As with many minis painters, I have a whole bunch of minis waiting on my desk to be painted. A lot of them I did intend to just do a monochromatic kind of one color with the wash, just to bring out the details of the mini without having to actually paint the thing. The long and the short is I'm hoping it's going to let me get through a bunch of that stuff pretty quickly, but I mean, I haven't even gotten around to trying them yet, because every time the evening comes around when I would maybe normally sit down and get a bit of painting done, I'm always just so exhausted that I don't want to do anything that doesn't involve me having my feet up in at least a reclined position. Oh, so tired. So they're waiting on my desk to be tried out and used, and hopefully they'll help me get some stuff done. The final thing to talk about from an acquisition standpoint isn't necessarily a new game, but it's a customization project that I've been working on for a long time that I finally finished up. And I intend to do a whole video just about this game and the project to do what I've done with it. But the original game was Helvetia Cup, which is a soccer-based game that I had picked up for my 9-year-old. I think it was as a Christmas present. However, I was really disappointed with the components of the game, and I could tell that he was sort of unenthusiastic about the weird fantasy theme that was on it, as opposed to a realistic soccer type of game. So what I wanted to do was take the game, because it has great rules as a simple soccer game, and I wanted to give it a complete visual overhaul to turn it into an actual real soccer team type of situation. So I spent months working on an update that I have called UEFA Champions League Barcelona versus Manchester United. And there's a big box here because I've done a ton of stuff with it. And like I said, I'm going to do a separate video where I break out all this stuff and give you a detailed look at everything that I've done. I basically redid every single component in the game, made it all much bigger and more interesting, and it was a much better hit with my son as a game to play than the Helvetia Cup original game was. So that's it for the new acquisitions. Let me clear the table here and I'll talk about the games played for this month. Alright, as for games played, we have a couple of the standards that have been making this list every month, so I'll go through those pretty quickly without spending much time on them. We have Zombie Kids, that legacy game we've been working through as a family. We got in at least 1 or 2 more games of this. Still a success, a fun game to be playing together with the 4 of us. Of course, there were the usual games of Magic, and this month my 9-year-old son asked me to teach him how to play Magic. So I wasn't sure how it would go. As a 9-year-old, I didn't know if he'd pick up on all the nuances and the many different keywords and how they interact with each other, but it turned out to go really well, and he loves this game. In fact, we were talking about doing a video of his top games, and he currently lists this in his top 3 to 5 somewhere. Now, I was pretty hesitant to introduce my children to a collectible card game. I was like, why don't you just get them on crack cocaine or something? And part of me was hoping he might not enjoy it very much, because I don't want him to get into this endless acquisitions thing that tends to happen with these collectible card games. But he did enjoy it a lot, and then my 7-year-old started to ask about learning to play the game too. So I was like, well, okay, I guess we could get into this and maybe have a lot of fun with it together. A few others that we did with a combination of either the kids and or the kids and my wife were Pirate Den, which is a fun and simple little game of simultaneous card selection and then resolving card abilities to see what happens, who ends up getting the most loot. These games of sort of simultaneously choosing your actions and then resolving them to see what happens tend to be kind of fun, and it's one that we've played a number of times with the kids. Another one was Doodle Quest, one of those sort of blind drawing games where you have this sort of clear overlay that you are writing on to try to end up encircling or touch certain aspects of the central picture that's in the middle of the table. This one was okay. It has a bunch of different random challenges that you can pull out and try together. It was one that doesn't necessarily have a great way to balance the skill level between adults and kids, so the adults were kind of winning fairly easily, which is a little bit frustrating for the kids, I suppose. And then we did get to Century Golem Edition as a family and got in several plays of it over the course of July. And I gotta tell you, it's just a really well done little game. The visuals and the physical components of the game are outstanding. The gameplay is a fairly simple little engine building type of deal where you are gradually over time sort of getting a more powerful hand of cards that's allowing you to purchase golems that are worth more points. And then yeah, there's just a kind of simple resource conversion of converting your less valuable gems to more valuable gems. It's all done in a very simple manner that is easily processed by the kids, and so we've all had fun with Century Golem Edition. And then, like I mentioned, my new edition of what was Helvetia Cup is one that I got to try out with my 9-year-old, and he enjoyed it. I enjoyed the game as well. The family rules are quite easy to follow along with. They're maybe a little too simplistic for somebody who's a serious gamer, but they do also have advanced, much more detailed rules that I haven't even read, so I don't know what they would do for the game. And I'm also not sure how they would fit in with my sort of more realistic version of the soccer game, because I think they sort of utilize these fantasy spells or something like that in the original theming of the game. But for now, we are having a good amount of fun with the family rules for Helvetia Cup. And then finally, just a couple of things that I managed to play with adults. Being summertime, with the kids around a lot, most of the gaming ends up being gaming with the children. It tends to not be a lot of adult interaction happening, but my friend and I have continued to meet for our weekly games of Magic. I've continued to test out new decks that I continue to build and tweak, and I mean, that deck building thing is just right up my alley, like I've mentioned before. And then finally, we have an absolute classic from the past couple of years, a big favorite with my wife and I, which is Clank. And we got to try the latest expansion that I picked up for Clank that I think was called Golden Silk. If it wasn't, I'll make a note of it when I edit this video. But the silk side is what we ended up playing, and that involved spiders and spider webs, and that particular map involved a lot more use of the swords on the cards. So I thought it was interesting how that expansion map shifted the focus maybe from the moving and purchasing things a lot more to the swords and how they were utilized in the game. So again, just a fun expansion. It doesn't change the game drastically by any means, but it makes it more interesting in a certain manner. I'm really excited about the fact that Clank, the legacy version, is coming out called Acquisitions Incorporated, and that's due to arrive pretty soon, I think. So we've almost worked our way through Aeon's End Legacy. We ended up getting stuck over the summer with only 1 or 2 scenarios left to play out with that one, and haven't gotten to it in quite some time now. So once we finish up that one, I really hope that we end up diving into Clank Legacy next. So that is it for what we played in July. Wait! I forgot one thing that I've been playing that involves my phone, and that is actually a chess app. Now, I've been a lifelong chess player. I learned the game when I was a young kid. I've not played regularly and certainly haven't played competitively on any level, but it's just a game that I've periodically come back to over the years. And for whatever reason, I decided in July that I wanted to learn more about the game because I was sort of frustrated at being at a beginner level after all these years of playing the game. So I spent a little bit of time studying opening theories, mid-game and end-game strategies, and I learned a lot more about just the basics of how to play good chess. And of course I had to get an app so that I could test out my new chess skills, and it went pretty well. I found myself beating some hard AIs. Not that that necessarily means anything, because I've played plenty of app games where the hard AIs were absolutely atrocious, but it made me feel good at least to win some games against the hard level AIs. I'm not winning a lot of those games, I don't want to overstate that, but I've enjoyed the mental challenge of diving in at least a little bit deeper into the game. And yeah, so I just wanted to mention that before I go. Alright, as always, I am dying to know what you've been playing. What do I need to be checking out? What's been a hot new item, or maybe even an older game that you've gotten back to and said, you know what, this really is a great game. In either case, I'd love to hear about it. Please let me know in the comments below. No, I'm done for real. Hey, it's Josh. Thank you so much for watching my video. If you could consider doing one of the following things, I would appreciate it. Give me a thumb up, subscribe to my channel. If you've already subscribed, hit that notification bell, or share the link to the video with somebody who you think would enjoy it. Of course they have, and I can see a whole I assume it would have still involved a multi-step process of spraying the Oh, wait a moment. Did I play Clank that month? Oh, yeah. Where you have your own sort of clear bit of... Then you put your clear piece of thing on top of it to see how... And it's all done in a very... And now finally just a couple of things that I managed to play with. And now just to find... It doesn't change the game too... I've enjoyed the mental challenge of